Lost American, Unrestricted Warfare, Lessons from the Persian Gulf and Iraq Wars. It was in the spring of 2003, and I was at UC Davis watching an anti war protest against the war in Iraq that had recently commenced. I ended up debating a student who appeared to be dressed as a hippie. He was arguing with me that the war would become a new Vietnam. The U.S., according to him, had no idea what it was getting itself into. I laughed at him when he made these comments. I was a Marine reservist and I figured that the war would go exactly the same way that the Persian Gulf War did. There would be no resistance after the initial invasion. The U.S. military was simply too powerful for anyone to challenge us. In many ways, I'd fallen into a trap that a lot of people do when thinking about the wars of the future. You think that the next war will be fought like the last. I thought that wars, going forward, would only be more high-tech versions of what happened during the Persian Gulf War. The authors in Unrestricted Warfare argue that the U.S. military in general has failed to learn this critical lesson. Now, we have to remember that this book was written in 1999. At the time, the U.S. focused heavily on the belief that they must prepare for a two-front war. The U.S. national security state was simply not ready to deal with non-military threats. All that changed on 9/11. Unrestricted Warfare makes the point that there were at least 49 departments to deal with anti-terrorist activities, but very little coordination between them. Even after 9/11, with the formation of the Department of Homeland Security and intense focus on terrorism, what is the main department that is meant to deal with terrorism currently in the U.S.? The U.S. and the world were simply not ready to deal with a new kind of threat. I came across an interesting quote in Unrestricted Warfare that goes like this: "The battlefield is next to you and the enemy is on the network. Only there is no smell of gunpowder or blood." With this quote, the authors are making it very clear that wars in the future may be fought in ways that one does not expect. When I was talking to that anti-war student back in 2003, I thought that since the Iraqis had nothing like our weapons and they would not stand a chance. I actually believed that an insurgency was a thing of the past. My imagination just wouldn't let me understand that there were other ways to fight a war. But I can't stop there. It just wasn't me that couldn't process what the anti-war student was saying. A lot of my friends thought the same thing. I can't tell you how many times I heard something along the lines of, "The US has the most powerful military in the world. Nothing can stand up to us." Again, my friends and I were very wrong. What my friends and I did not understand at the time was that there were other threats that the military may not be well suited to handle. Even fighting an insurgency in Iraq does not take bombers and tanks. It takes an understanding of the local population and going into work with the people and to help them as well. The end of the Cold War did not lead to peace as the US government thought it would. Instead, it led to a lot more conflicts that in many ways were much more complicated to deal with in the Soviet Union. A lot of these conflicts were religious or ethnic-based conflicts, such as what happened in Bosnia, Rwanda, Somalia, Congo, and Chechnya. The list goes on and on. To deal with these conflicts, high-tech weapons were not needed. Again, an understanding of the culture and a counterinsurgency strategy should be used. The U.S. military was not prepared for these types of conflicts. In many ways, these conflicts were examples of how future wars and conflicts may be fought. One of the main mistakes that my friends and I made was that we didn't really understand that a main aspect about war is that it's about bending your opponent's will. Let's imagine a scenario where a terrorist group threatens to wipe out everyone's accounts at a certain bank. They don't have to mention the bank, just say that a certain bank will be hit. That alone would cause a lot of panic, with people pulling their money from all types of banks across the United States. The terrorist group then demands that the U.S. pull out of the Middle East, and now the U.S. has to decide whether or not this is to be done. Well, as far as I know, the U.S. has a policy of not negotiating with terrorists, so in this case, the major bank would have all its data wiped. The terrorist group is no military threat. They're just hackers who are threatening the world order, and in this case, they just did. There's a quote in Chapter 5 of Unrestricted Warfare which the authors took from an FBI agent. The quote is as follows: "Give me 10 carefully chosen hackers, and within 90 days, I would then be able to have this nation lay down its arms and surrender." This FBI agent understands a lot of what the authors are getting at in Unrestricted Warfare. If I went back in time to the 2003 version of me, and this quote was mentioned to me, I would have laughed at you. There is no military force behind that statement. It's just computer hackers, and how much damage could they really do? The final thing that's talked about in this chapter is how war is like a cocktail, meaning you mix and match different components to win. The authors give the example of the cocktail of using long spears plus shields. This combination prepares a soldier for both attack and defense. The proper combination of weapons can give you a huge advantage over your opponent. The book gives a further example of how tactics were combined during the Gulf War to give a winning combination. An alliance was created, manipulation of the media was done, economic blockades, etc. Again, the side that combines well is the side that will win. On a side note here, I noticed that in a previous chapter the authors appeared to attack the Persian Gulf War, but in this chapter they used an example of using combination of methods to win. I'd argue that the reason why the authors attacked the Persian Gulf War is because of how the US military came out of the war. It focused so much on technology. Hardly anything else was talked about. I remember being in third grade and hearing the news talk about how it was the Nintendo war. Being a kid with a Nintendo, I was super excited to hear that. I knew that it didn't mean it was about video games, but about how technology played such a huge role in the war. It was almost as if the future had arrived and that future was going to be technology. Now I return to where I started this essay. After the Gulf War, the US thought that the next war would be fought in a similar manner. In this case, the US most likely thought that a big component of future wars would be massive tank battles and using cruise missiles to take out your opponent. Even though the Iraq War started out this way, it quickly changed into something else entirely. Similar things happened in Afghanistan. What the US military expected did not come as the US military expected things would. The fact of the matter is that the US military and any military is simply not ready to face every threat that can face a nation. Just like that mistake that my friends and I made back in 2003. You don't have to have a strong military to win a war. You just have to wear down your opponent's will to fight.